Welcome to this cybersecurity class. So we have studied what are all the vulnerability assessment tools and all. So what are all the tools present? We have studied, say for example, there might be a port scanner, there might be a banner grabbing tools are there, and there may be a protocol analyzers are there. So number of tools we have studied, and we have also seen some, some examples also, right? And coming to the vulnerability, scanners, coming to the vulnerability scanners, what is mean by vulnerability scanners here? It is a generic term for a range of products that look for vulnerabilities in the networks or systems. So maybe a network or maybe a systems, it will look what are all the vulnerabilities present. So it is with the help of some tool we can look what are all the vulnerabilities present in the network or systems. So what it will do actually, it will identify the vulnerabilities and alert the network administrators. So what this tool will do is it will identify the vulnerabilities and alert the network administrators to these problems and all. So most of the vulnerability scanners maintains the database. As I said earlier, every tool will maintain, vulnerability scanner tool will maintain a database. Some advanced tool will maintain a very big database and all. So that with that database, it will categorize and describes the vulnerabilities that it can detect. So it will have a whole structure of the vulnerabilities which is present in that particular network or a system, and it will catalog and categorize what are all the vulnerabilities it has been detected in that particular systems. So vulnerability scanner is a range of product or a tool that look for vulnerabilities in the network or a systems. It will identify the vulnerabilities and report to the network administrators. So that is actually vulnerability scanners. So here I have shown some example for a vulnerability scanner. It is from Acunetics software. So it has it scans a particular system and it gives a report, right? Vulnerability informations. It has a high level of risk is there, threat level is there, and medium this much amount of threat level is there, low and informational. So it also it has also shown that one or more high security type vulnerabilities have been discovered by this scanner. The malicious users can exploit the vulnerabilities and the compromises backend database, and it can deface this website also. So it might be a web server scanning results. Here it has been shown, right? So with the help of this Acunetics software, right, it shows the report, right? So it identifies the vulnerabilities in that particular server, and it shows the threat level report. So how far it is actually vulnerable, it shows. So that is actually the use of vulnerability scanner. And what are all the vulnerability scanners capability? Generically, what are all the vulnerability scanners capabilities? So it alerts when the new systems are added to the systems. If I'm having 10 systems in my network, if somebody is entering into my network by accessing the Wi-Fi, right? So I can find out with the help of these vulnerability scanners if any new systems is adding to my network. So and then it detect when an application is compromised. So I'm having number of application in my network or in my system. So which application is actually getting compromised, I can detect with the help of vulnerability scanner. And then detect when an internal systems begins to port scan. If some attacker is from the outside, from the remote, they are trying to scan what are all the ports which is open in my system. If he is using some tool and he is checking my ports, checking my system's ports, then I can detect which internal system is begins to port scan and all. So that is the thing. So it detects which ports are served and which ports are browsed for each individual system. So what are all the services given for each and every ports I can detect. And then identify which application and the server's host or transmit the sensitive information. So which application is actually transmitting the sensitive information, and which server is actually, which host is actually transmitting the sensitive information, I can identify. And finally, it can maintain a log of all the interactive network sessions and all. So as I said earlier, it maintains a database and it has its every log of interactive network sessions. So these are all the capabilities of vulnerability scanners. So these points are very important. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 6 points are very, very important. So these are all the capabilities of vulnerability scanners. Right? So we are going to study some vulnerability assessment tools. Open vulnerability and assessment language OVAL. The problem with the assessment tools is no standard. So what we have studied so far, the vulnerability Acumatic software, that is actually a vulnerability assessment tool. So it has its own standard, but there is no particular standard for collecting and analyzing the reporting vulnerabilities. So there is a problem with assessment tools. So conventional assessment tools, vulnerability assessments, so that is not having a standard for collecting, analyzing, reporting, and vulnerabilities. Right, so it has a randomized, coding format to collecting the, collecting the logs and analyzing and reporting. It has its own law and all, but there is no standard format or there to collect and analyze and reporting the vulnerabilities. So there is a standard called Open Vulnerability and Assessment Language. This is designed to promote an open and publicly available security content. This standardizes the information transfer across the different security tools and services. So with this open vulnerability and assessment language, we can standardize the information transfer across the different security tools and services. Okay, so this is an example output for Oval. So it has its own standard, right, for collecting and analyzing and reporting the vulnerabilities, right? So it is an example. So what is mean by honeypots and honeynets? Honeypot, computer protected by the minimal security and intentionally configured with the vulnerabilities and contains the bogus data files. So honeypot means it has its own bogus data files, fake data files, right, that has been intentionally configured with the vulnerabilities. It has its own vulnerabilities that has been configured intentionally. So computer protected by minimal security. So it has its own minimal security. It has been configured with such kind of minimal security, and it has been intentionally configured with some sort of vulnerabilities and contains some bogus. So as I said earlier, honeypot is nothing but a computer which has its own minimal security. It has been intentionally configured with the vulnerabilities. It has its own vulnerabilities. It has been configured in such a way that it has its own vulnerability and contains bogus data files. So what is the need of configuring this kind of having its vulnerability, having its minimal security, and contains bogus data files? So with such kind of configurations, this will attract the attackers. It will attract the hackers to get into these systems, and hence it is called actually honeypot. The goal is to trick attackers into revealing their techniques. So as I said earlier, the goal of the honeypot is actually trick the attackers into revealing their techniques. So how far they have been using their techniques, the attackers is using their techniques to get into these systems which is having intentionally configured vulnerabilities and minimal securities. What is meant by honeynet? Honeynet, it is a network setup with intentionally vulnerabilities and honeypots. So it consists of number of honeypots, and it consists of its own network having its own intentionally configured vulnerabilities. So that is actually honeynet. Okay, collection of honeypots is nothing but honeynet. It has its own vulnerability, network vulnerabilities also. So now we are going into the now we are getting into the difference between the vulnerability scanning and penetration testing. There are two important vulnerability assessment procedures are there. So the one is actually vulnerability scanning and then penetration testing. It seems like a similar, and also it been a little bit confused and all. So both plays a very important role in uncovering the vulnerabilities. So vulnerability assessment and penetration testing. Let us get into the vulnerability scanning. So under vulnerability assessment, we are having two things. The first one is vulnerability scanning and then penetration testing. What is the difference between the vulnerability scanning and penetration testing? Vulnerability scanning. Automated software searches a system for known security weakness. So it is nothing but an automated software. So it has its own capability to check or to search the system for a known security weakness. So it will check the known security weakness, vulnerability scanning. It creates its own report for the potential exposures. So it creates its own report. Should be conducted on the existing systems and as new technology is deployed, right? So it will be conducted, the vulnerability scanning will be conducted right, on the existing system. Please make a note on the existing systems, or also if new technology is deployed, right, whenever the new technology view new application is deploying, so a vulnerability scanning can be done, usually performed from the inside security perimeter. Please make a note, in vulnerability scanning it has been performed in inside security perimeter. It has been done within the security perimeter, does not interfere with the normal security operations. It will not interfere with the normal security operations. So this is called actually vulnerability scanning. Okay, what is meant by vulnerability scanning? It is nothing but an vulnerability scanning is nothing but an automated software searches a system for the known security weakness. It has its own report that exposes the potential vulnerabilities. It has been conducted on the existing system, right? In the existing system, which is present actually, and it has been performed inside the security parameter. It doesn't interfere with the normal network operations. What are all the vulnerability scanning methods are there? There are several methods are there. The first one is intrusive vulnerability scanning. What is meant by intrusive vulnerability scanning? It attempts to actually penetrate the system in order to perform the simulated attack, right? It will do some simulation of attack, right, to find the vulnerabilities. So attempts to actually penetrate the systems in order to perform the simulated attack. What is meant by non-intrusive vulnerability scan? Uses only available informations to hypothesis, to assume the status of the vulnerabilities. So it uses only the available informations, right? It doesn't have its own simulated attack and all. So it has its available information to assume, to hypothesis the status of the vulnerability. How far it is actually vulnerable, it will assume. So that is actually non-intrusive vulnerability scanning. And what is meant by credentialed vulnerability scan? Scanners that permit the username and password of an active account to be stored and used. Say for example, if I am at network administration of an institution or for an organization, with the help of this vulnerability scanning method, vulnerability scanning tool, I can give my root password and administrator username to scan the whole system. So that is what they have been mentioning here as a credentialed vulnerability scan. So what it will scan with the help of the root password and root username and password, it will scan everything, right? If I'm giving the, which means that if I'm giving the root password and root username, which means that I'm giving the full access to that particular vulnerability scanning application. So if I'm giving the full accessibility to the vulnerability scanning application, it will scan everything. It will get into the deep, and hence it is called actually credentialed vulnerability scan. What is meant by non-credentialed vulnerability scan? Scanners that do not use the credentials. So they will not use the credentials actually, right? So they will not use the credentials. The system admin will not give the root password, the system admin password, username and password, so that it will not scan each and every vulnerabilities, right? Okay, so this is all these four things are called as different categories of vulnerability scanning methods. How they have been defining here the intrusive and non-intrusive vulnerability scans. So what is mean by intrusive vulnerability scanning and non-intrusive vulnerability scanning? So as I said earlier, the description is vulnerability assessment tools or intrusive scripts to penetrate penetrate and attacks. It has its own simulation of attacks. So non-intrusive, so through social engineering and general reconnaissance efforts, information is gathered, the known vulnerabilities and the weakness of the system. So this is called actually non-intrusive. We have seen already. Okay, let us enter into the penetration testing. So what is mean by vulnerability assessment? We have studied, right? So what is mean by penetration testing? Penetration testing, it is designed to exploit the system's weakness, right? So vulnerability assessment, it will determine, it will do the vulnerability scanning in the existing systems. Here it is penetration testing is designed to exploit the system's weakness. It relies on the tester's skill and knowledge and cunning. So it is purely relies on the tester's skill, right? Who is actually doing the penetration testing? So that guy is called actually testers. So So it relies on the tester skill, knowledge and cunning. How far the the tester, penetration tester, is actually having the skill and having the knowledge, and how far he is actually cunning. Based upon that, he can find, he can exploit the system's weakness. So usually conducted by the independent contractor. Tests usually conducted outside the security perimeter, but in case of vulnerability assessment, it has been conducted inside the security parameter. But here in the case of penetration testings, it has been conducted outside the security perimeter, and may even disrupt the network operations also. So in case of vulnerability assessment, it won't disrupt the current network operations. But here in case of penetration testings, it will disrupt the network operations also. So the end results is the penetration testing report. Okay. Okay, what are all the penetration testing techniques are there? There are 3 techniques are there. So black box testing technique, white box testing technique, and gray box testing technique. So what is meant by black box test? Testers has no prior knowledge of the network infrastructures. So that is actually black boxing. So I don't have any prior knowledge of a particular network infrastructures, but I am going to do a penetration testing. So that is actually black box test. What is white box test? The tester has its own in-depth knowledge of the network and the systems being tested. So this is the group of the systems. It has its own 10 systems. This is the network. This is the LAN. That in-depth knowledge I have been knowing before going to do the penetration testing. Then that is called actually white box test. What is meant by gray box test here? Some limited information has been provided to the testers, not the full informations. Maybe it will give the network informations. Maybe it will give just the system informations. So that is actually gray box testings. Based upon that, these 3 categories also we can categorize the hackers, black box hackers, white box hackers, and gray box hackers also. Okay, so vulnerability scan and penetration testing features we will see one by one. The first feature is a frequency. When we are coming to the vulnerability scanning, when new equipment is installed and at least once per month thereafter, right? So here in the penetration testing, once per year. So what are all the goals in vulnerability scan? It reveals the known vulnerabilities that have not yet been addressed. So in case of vulnerability scanning, the goal is actually it reveal the information. It reveal the known vulnerabilities. Reveal the known vulnerabilities that have not yet been addressed. So that is the ultimate goal of the vulnerability scan. In case of penetration testings, what is the goal? Discover the unknown exposure. So that is the difference. It discovers the known vulnerabilities. Here it discovers the unknown vulnerabilities. Since pen testing is actually severe, it is actually giving an it has been done with the in-depth knowledge of the hackers and attackers. It is purely based upon the skill of an attacker and skill of the tester. So it definitely find the unknown exposure, unknown vulnerability to the normal business process. So how far this can be done? This vulnerabilities can be done. So that is actually the frequency. It has been done once per month. It has been done once per year, right? If I am having an organization, if I want to do a vulnerability scanner, I can do per month, right? I want to do a penetration testing, I can do once per year. Since penetration testing will interrupt the network operations also, and hence it can be done once per year. Okay. So the goal, as I said earlier, it will reveal the known. Here it will reveal the unknown vulnerabilities. Tester, in-house technician, right? Here the tester is actually in-house. He is actually employing within the organization. That is the tester. Who is testing here in the vulnerability scanning? It is in-house technician. Here it is independent external consultant. It may be a third party. It may be some other independent individual consultant also. Location, performed inside. Here it has been performed outside. So inside the network perimeter here, outside the network perimeter here. Disruption, passive evaluations with no disruptions is there. Here active attack can be done with the help of usually active attack is performing here with the help of penetration testing. That will potentially disrupt the network, right, and also the systems. Tools, automated softwares can be used here. Knowledge and skill of the testers. he can get into the particular system with its own knowledge, with his own skill. I mean the tester skill. So in case of penetration testing, but here automated software has been used. Cost, it is low actually, maybe approximately $1,500 plus the staff time. Here it is approximately 12,500 right, for doing a penetration testing. So they have been actually using their testers knowledge and skill, and hence it is actually costly. A report, and also it has been with the help of this pen testing, it has been finding the unknown exposure, and hence it is actually costly. Report, comprehensive comparison of the current vulnerabilities and compared to the baseline. So as I said earlier, there is a baseline report is there, so it is already there. So they will run this automated vulnerability scanner, and they have generated the report, and they will compare the IT baseline. This is actually vulnerability scanning. Here, short analysis of the how attack was successful and damage to the data. So here the report will be actually an analysis basis and how the attack is successfully and damage to the attack. So that is actually report here in the penetration testing. Value, it detects the weakness in hardware or software. Here in case of penetration testing, it is actually preventive, reduces the organization exposure. So this is actually gives the high value. With the help of penetration testing, we can prevent the future threat and reduces the organization exposure and all. So these are all the things, features we can compare the vulnerability scanning and penetration testing. Okay. So the next topic is actually third-party integration. So here, increasing the number of organizations use the third-party vendors to create a partnerships. Say for example, you consider Ernst & Young. So it is actually a third-party vendors that will help for doing a penetration testing or vulnerability assessment and all. So, and hence they have been speaking here with the third-party integration. So if I want to do a vulnerability scanning or penetration testing, I can go for the third-party vendors to create a partnership. So third-party integration, risk of combining the systems and the data with the outside entities. So it is actually third-party vendors. Ernst & Young is actually doing some security auditing and vulnerability assessment testing and all for different clients. So while doing such things, it has its own risk, right? So combining the systems, we have to combine our systems, our IT systems, our organizational system to that Ernst & Young, to the third-party vendors, right? It gives its own risk, right? Maybe some person, insider attacker, may be there in the Ernst & Young, like the third-party vendors. They will steal our data also. So there might be a risk. So what is onboarding? Startup relationship between the partners. What is offboarding? Termination of the agreements. So for 2 years I'm signing the agreement, so that is onboarding, and after 2 years I'm terminating the agreement, so that is actually offboarding. So what are the third-party integration risk? Onboarding and offboarding. How will entities combine their services without compromising their existing security defenses? So if I am having an organization, IT organizations, I'm going to combine with a third party. I have to do some integration. So what may be the risk on onboarding and offboarding? How will entities combine their services? So we have to look into how will I'm going to combine their services without compromising the existing security, my existing security. How far I can merge their services. The second point is application and social media network sharing. How will the different applications be shared between the partners? So how they can share their, different applications will be shared between their partners. And then privacy and risk awareness. What happens if the privacy policy of one of the partners is less restrictive than the other partners? These things also, these questions will also be considered, during the third-party integrations. And then finally, data integration. This is a very important thing. Who owns the data generated through the partnership and how the data can be protected? So this questions to be answered before getting into the third-party integrations. So these are all the risks, 4 risks, main risks. It has been in the form of question. So we have to look into it. So the next thing is interoperability agreements. So between this third-party vendors and all, how the agreements can be signed and all. Service level agreement, a service contract between a vendor and a client. So that deals with the service level agreement. Blanket purchase agreement, pre-arranged purchase or a sale agreement between the government agencies and a business. So that is actually blanket purchase agreement. Memorandum of understanding, you all know, right? MOU, right? So we are having in our institution itself, we are having a number of MOUs. Say for example, right, QAssure is there. They have signed MOU. So describes the agreement between the two or more parties, right? So security issues will be arise while doing this MOU and all, right? Who will be handling the data, right? If the data is generating in our institutions, whether they are having the capability of accessing our data and all. So that is actually memorandum of understanding. Interconnection security agreement intended to minimize the risks of security risks of our data transmitted across the network. So dealing with the data transmitting across the network, that is actually interconnection security agreement. So the last topic is mitigating and deterring the attacks. The standard techniques for mitigating and deterring the attacks is creating a security posture, selecting and configuring the controls, hardening and reporting. So after doing the vulnerability assessment or penetration testing, the ultimate objective of doing this vulnerability assessment and penetration testing is finally to provide the security for that particular organizations and all. So where we have did this vulnerability assessment and pen testing. So finally, after getting the report from the vulnerability assessment or penetration testings, we have to do this thing to mitigate and deterring the attacks, creating a security posture, configuring controls, selecting and configuring controls, hardening and reporting. We will see one by creating a security posture. Security posture describes the strategy regarding the security. So what are all the strategy I'm going to follow in my institutions after the vulnerability assessment regarding the security? Elements of security procedures: initial baseline configuration, continuous security monitoring, and remediations. Again, we will see one by one. What I mean by initial baseline. So selecting the appropriate controls. So selecting appropriate controls to use is a key to So the next is selecting the appropriate controls. Selecting appropriate controls to use is a key to mitigate and deterring the attacks. So appropriate controls, if I am using in my system, say for example, I'm not allowing the pop-ups, and I'm blocking the pop-ups if I am maintaining that control in my browser. So it is actually mitigating the number of applications, malicious applications that is getting entered into my system. So it is actually key to mitigate the deterring the attacks. Many different controls can be used. A lot of controls are there. I mean, default controls are there in your system, in your browser, in your antivirus systems, right? And everything, it has its own different controls. Common controls that are important to meet the specific security goals. There are also some common controls. You have to follow that common controls so that you can mitigate the attacks. Appropriate controls for different security goals. So if I want to maintain my confidentiality, I have to do encryption, steganography, and access control. I have to go for these controls. If I want to check my integrity, I can use my hashing, digital signature certificates, and non-repudiation tools. If I want to maintain my availability of my information, redundancy, I have to check for redundancy. I can have a backup, that is actually redundancy. Fault tolerance and patching, we have to go for a patching and all. Safety, fencing, lighting, locks, CCTV, escape plans, and routing safety drills in case of preventing the in case of take care of the physical devices and all. Configuring controls. Key to mitigate the deterring the attacks in proper configuration testings of the controls. So we have to configure the controls. One category of control is those that detect or prevent the attacks. So one category of control is those to detect or prevent the attacks. Another example of configuring the controls regarding what occurs when a normal function is interrupted by a failure. Does the safety take the priority, or does the security? So we have to give a trade-off between this safety and security. So, and then hardening. This is a very important domain in mitigating the attacks, deterring the attacks. So hardening, it eliminates as many security risks as possible. Techniques to harden the systems, right? What is the basic hardening method for my system is I have to give a very strong password, protecting the accounts with password, disabling the unnecessary accounts, right? I couldn't give access to different accounts. We have to disable unnecessary accounts, unused accounts and all, and disabling the unnecessary services also. In my systems, if the services is not needed, I have to disable it, right? Protecting the management interfaces and applications. We have to protect the management interfaces and the applications with the help of hardening. Reporting, providing information regarding the events that occurs, right? Alarms or alerts, sound warning if specific situation is occurring. Example, alert if too many failed password attempts, right? So if continuously, if some intruder inside my organizations is try to getting enter into a system by guessing the password, it has to be alerted to the network administrator. So that is actually alarms. Reporting can provide information on the trends, right? Can indicate a serious impending situation. For example, multiple user accounts experiencing multiple password attempts, right? So that is actually for a particular impending situations, they have to indicate everything. So that is actually reporting. Reporting can provide information on trends. So these are all about this vulnerability assessment, right? Under vulnerability assessment, we have seen a lot of things, right? So we'll see one by one in the summary. Vulnerability assessment, it is a methodological evaluation of exposure of assets to the risk. So it will do the evaluation of exposure. So on what thing I am doing this evaluation and all, it is purely depending upon the assets, right? We have been doing this evaluation on the assets. 5 steps in the assessments we have seen, right? So 5 steps of vulnerability assessment. There are 5 elements are there. Risk describes the likelihood that threat agent will be exploit a vulnerability. Risk is nothing but the likelihood that threat agent will exploit a vulnerability. Several techniques can be used in a vulnerability assessment. We have seen every techniques for vulnerability assessments. We have seen the port scanners, right? Nmap is a port scanner, protocol analyzer, Wireshark is a protocol analyzer. Number of honeypots are there used as an assessment tool to assess the vulnerable present in the network or system. Vulnerability scan searches the system for a known security weakness and report findings. So we have been seeing the difference between the vulnerability scanning and pen testing. Vulnerability scan is nothing but it searches the known security weakness. Penetration testing is designed to exploit the undiscovered any discovered systems weakness. Undiscovered vulnerabilities. Testers may have the various levels of system knowledge. So this is very important. Tester, it is purely, the pen testing is purely based upon the tester's knowledge, their own skill and knowledge. Standard techniques used to mitigate healthy security posture, proper configuration of controls, hardening and reporting. So these are all the final thing we have studied in the mitigation and deterring of attacks. Okay. Hope you have learned something in vulnerability assessment, and if you have any doubts, you can post me. Thank you.